The skyscraper window washer and the face on the 82nd floor. My name is Marcus Chen, and I have been washing windows on New York City skyscrapers for 15 years. I thought I had seen everything the vertical world had to offer, from peregrine falcons nesting on ledges to executives having affairs in corner offices, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered on the 82nd floor of the Meridian Tower that October morning. The thing about my job is that we see things nobody else does. We exist in a realm between the ground and the sky. Suspended on platforms that sway with the wind, inches from glass walls that separate us from lives we can observe but never touch, most people inside those buildings forget we exist. They go about their business as if the windows clean themselves, as if we are invisible ghosts floating past their climate-controlled worlds. That invisibility is both a blessing and a curse, because when you see things you should not see, when you witness the impossible, no one believes you, no one wants to believe you. It started 3 months ago when our company, Vertical Solutions, won the contract for the Meridian Tower, a 90-story glass and steel monolith in Midtown Manhattan. The building had been closed for renovations for 2 years after a series of unfortunate incidents that the media had largely ignored. 7 people had jumped from various floors over a 6-month period, all from the north face of the building. All between the hours of 3 and 4 in the morning, the official report blamed it on a statistical anomaly, a cluster of unrelated suicides, but those of us in the high-rise maintenance community knew better. We had heard the whispers, the stories from the previous cleaning crew who had quit en masse, refusing to say why. The building management had gone through 3 different window washing companies in 6 months before approaching us with an offer too lucrative to refuse. My partner Jake Morrison and I were assigned to the Meridian Tower. Jake was new to the business, eager and fearless in the way only the young can be. He had been washing windows for only 6 months, but he was a natural, moving along the platform with the grace of a dancer, never showing the slightest fear even when the wind gusted hard enough to slam us against the building. I liked Jake. He reminded me of myself when I started, before I learned that the real danger in our profession was not falling, it was seeing. Our first week at the Meridian was uneventful. We started early, usually around 5 in the morning, working our way up the building as the city woke below us. The north face was scheduled for Wednesdays, and I noticed Jake always seemed quieter on those days, less chatty than usual. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said the north side felt different, colder somehow, even when the sun was shining directly on it. I knew what he meant. There was something about that side of the building that made my skin crawl, a feeling like being watched by eyes that were not quite human. It was on our 4th Wednesday that I first saw the face. We were working on the 80th floor, the platform swaying gently in the morning breeze, when Jake suddenly stopped moving. His squeegee was pressed against the glass, but his hand had gone still, his face pale as he stared at something inside the building. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but an empty office, desks covered in plastic sheeting, renovation material stacked against the walls, but Jake kept staring, his breath coming in short gasps that fogged the glass in front of him. I moved closer and put my hand on his shoulder, asking if he was all right. He jumped at my touch, nearly dropping his squeegee, then shook his head as if clearing cobwebs. He mumbled something about thinking he saw someone inside, but when we both looked again, the office was as empty as before. We finished that floor in silence, but I noticed Jake kept glancing back at that particular window, his movements jerky and nervous. The next Wednesday, Jake called in sick. It was the first time he had missed a day since starting with the company. I worked alone, making my way up the north face with only my thoughts for company. The building seemed quieter than usual, the normal sounds of construction from within muffled and distant. When I reached the 82nd floor, I understood why Jake had been so disturbed. There was a face pressed against the glass from the inside, but it was wrong, all wrong. The features were human but stretched, as if someone had grabbed the skin and pulled it in different directions. The eyes were too large, too dark, like pools of oil that reflected nothing. The mouth was open in what might have been a scream or a laugh, revealing teeth that seemed to go on forever, extending back into a throat that was nothing but darkness. I blinked, and the face was gone, leaving only my own pale reflection staring back at me. I finished the floor as quickly as possible, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my tools. When I got back to ground level, I checked the building directory. The 82nd floor was supposed to be empty, had been empty since the renovations began. The security guard confirmed that no workers were scheduled for that floor. no one had access except maintenance. I did not tell him what I had seen. I had been in this business long enough to know that reporting strange things only led to drug tests and unemployment. Jake came back the next day, looking haggard and thin, as if he had not slept in a week. We did not talk about the North Face, did not talk about much of anything, but I could see the knowledge in his eyes, the understanding that he had seen something that should not exist. We worked in companionable silence, both of us dreading the coming Wednesday. When Wednesday arrived, Jake and I stood at the base of the Meridian Tower, looking up at its imposing height. The North Face seemed to shimmer in the early morning light, the windows reflecting the sky in ways that made my eyes water. Jake turned to me, his young face drawn and serious, and told me he had been doing research. The 7 people who had jumped, they had all been working on the 82nd floor. They had all been found with their eyes gone. Not gouged out, just gone, as if they had never existed. The coroner had ruled it as post-mortem animal interference, rats or birds getting to the bodies before they were discovered, but Jake had found the crime scene photos online. The eye sockets were smooth, unmarked, as if the eyes had simply vanished. We took the construction elevator to the 80th floor, neither of us speaking. The platform hung waiting for us, swaying slightly in the wind that always seemed stronger on the North Face. As we secured ourselves and began our descent from above, I noticed Jake had brought something new, a small digital camera clipped to his belt. He saw me looking and gave a grim smile, saying if we were going to see impossible things, we might as well document them. The 81st floor was clean, nothing but empty offices and the occasional pigeon startled by our presence, but as we lowered ourselves to the 82nd floor, the temperature dropped noticeably, our breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the metal rails of our platform. Jake raised his camera, his fingers already stiff with cold, and began recording. The face was there, waiting for us. It pressed against the glass with such force that the window creaked and groaned, spider web cracks appearing around the point of contact. But this time, it was not alone. Behind it, in the dim recesses of the office, more faces emerged from the shadows. They moved wrong, gliding rather than walking, their limbs bending in ways that hurt to watch, and their eyes, those terrible dark eyes, all focused on us with an intensity that made my stomach clench. Jake was filming everything, his camera steady despite the tremors I could see running through his body. The faces pressed closer to the glass, and I realized with growing horror that they were not stopping at the window, they were pushing through it, the glass bending and warping like plastic, reaching out toward us. The one in front, the one I had seen before, opened its mouth wider, and I heard its voice not with my ears but inside my head, a sound like grinding metal and screaming wind. It said our names, it knew our names. Jake dropped his camera, the device tumbling into the void below, and grabbed his ascending gear. His fingers fumbled with the controls as he tried to raise the platform, but the motor had stopped working, the platform frozen in place as if held by invisible hands. The faces were pushing through the glass now, their stretched features becoming even more distorted as they forced themselves through the solid barrier, reaching for us with hands that were too long, fingers that had too many joints. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my squeegee and swung it at the nearest face. The metal handle passed through it as if it were made of smoke, but the creature recoiled, its features twisting in what might have been pain or anger. Jake was screaming now, a high-pitched sound that cut through the morning air, as more faces emerged from windows all along the floor, surrounding us. The platform began to shake violently, the metal groaning under stresses it was never designed to handle. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped, the faces withdrew, sliding back through the glass as if being pulled by invisible strings. The temperature returned to normal so quickly that the frost on the platform turned instantly to water, soaking our clothes. Jake and I sat there, gasping for breath, staring at the now empty offices beyond the glass. The windows showed no sign of damage, no cracks or warping, as if nothing had happened. The platform motor hummed back to life, and Jake wasted no time in sending us up, away from the 82nd floor. We did not stop at the 83rd, or the 84th, we rode all the way to the roof in silence, both of us trying to process what we had experienced. When we finally reached solid ground, Jake collapsed to his knees and vomited, his whole body shaking. I was not much better, my legs barely able to support my weight. We reported equipment failure and went home early. Jake quit that same day, calling the office and saying he would not be coming back, ever. I should have done the same, but I had a family to support, bills to pay, and 15 years of experience that did not translate well to other professions, I tried to get assigned to a different building, but Vertical Solutions had a contract to fulfill, and I was their most experienced cleaner. They needed me on the Meridian Tower. So I went back, but I refused to work the north face alone. The company brought in Tommy Nguyen, a veteran washer from our Chicago branch. He was older than me, had been cleaning windows for 25 years, and had a reputation for being unflappable. Nothing scared Tommy, or so everyone said. I did not tell him about the faces, did not warn him about the 82nd floor. I told myself it was because I did not want to sound crazy, but the truth was I hoped I had imagined it all, that having another person there would somehow make it not real. The next Wednesday came too quickly. Tommy and I suited up, checking our equipment with the methodical precision that comes from years of practice. He was chatty, telling stories about the worst buildings he had worked on, the time a window had exploded outward from pressure differentials, the executive who had a heart attack and died against the glass while Tommy was cleaning the other side, normal horror stories, the kind we all accumulated in this job. I let him talk, grateful for the distraction. We started at the 78th floor, working our way up. Tommy was good, efficient and careful, exactly the kind of partner you wanted when dangling hundreds of feet above the pavement. As we approached the 82nd floor, I felt the familiar chill, the dropping temperature that signaled we were entering their domain. Tommy noticed it too, making a comment about the building climate control being screwed up, but he kept working, professional to the core. The faces appeared as we reached the middle of the floor, first one, then three, then dozens, pressing against the glass from inside. Their dark eyes tracked our movements, and their mouths moved in unison, speaking words I could not hear but felt in my bones. Tommy stopped working, his squeegee dropping from nerveless fingers. He stared at the faces, his weathered face going pale, then turned to look at me with an expression of betrayal and terror. He asked me if I knew, if I had known this would happen. I could not lie to him, not with those things watching us. I nodded, and he closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was resignation there, mixed with a professional determination that I recognized. We had a job to do, bills to pay, families to feed. Even the impossible had to be faced when there was no other choice. We cleaned those windows, Tommy and I, working around the faces that pressed and pushed against the glass. We did not speak, did not acknowledge them beyond the occasional flinch when one would appear suddenly in front of us. The faces seemed agitated by our lack of fear, their movements becoming more frantic, more aggressive. They pounded on the glass from the inside, leaving no marks but creating sounds that reverberated through the platform. Then Tommy made a mistake. He looked directly into the eyes of one of them, meeting its gaze for just a moment too long. I saw the change immediately, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. He stood up on the platform, dropping his tools, and began walking toward the edge. I grabbed him, wrestling him back from the precipice, but he was strong, stronger than a man his age should be. He spoke, but the voice was not his. It was the grinding metal sound I had heard in my head, saying things in a language that predated human speech. I held on to Tommy as he struggled, the platform swaying dangerously. The faces pressed harder against the glass, and I could feel their excitement, their hunger. They wanted him to jump, needed him to jump, just like the 7 who had come before, but I would not let go. I wrapped the safety line around us both, binding us to the platform, and held on as Tommy thrashed and screamed in that inhuman voice. The sun rose higher, its light hitting the north face directly, and the faces began to fade, becoming translucent, then invisible. Tommy went limp in my arms, his eyes returning to normal. We sat there on the platform, 82 floors above the street, both of us shaking. When he could speak again, Tommy looked at me and said we needed to find out what was on that floor, what had happened there to create such wrongness. That night, after filing our reports and enduring the questions about another equipment malfunction, Tommy and I met at a bar near Penn Station. He had been doing research, just like Jake had, but Tommy had connections, old-timers in the business who remembered things. The Meridian Tower, he told me, had been built on the site of the old Blackwood Sanitarium, a psychiatric hospital that had burned down in 1892. The fire had started on the 8th floor, in the wing where they kept the most violent patients, the ones they experimented on with early surgical techniques, trying to cure madness by cutting into brains. 82 people had died in that fire, trapped behind locked doors as the flames consumed them. the newspapers of the time had reported that witnesses saw faces in the smoke, pressed against the windows, mouths open in silent screams. The building that had replaced the sanitarium had also had problems, and the one after that, every structure on that site had experienced unexplained incidents, all centered around what would have been the 8th floor of the original building, now the 82nd floor of the Meridian Tower. Tommy had more to tell me. The 7 people who had jumped, they had all reported seeing things before their deaths, had all complained about faces in the windows, voices in their heads. Their employers had dismissed their concerns, attributing them to stress or mental illness, but Tommy had found their families, had talked to the ones willing to speak. Each jumper had described the same thing, dark-eyed faces that were not quite human, that whispered promises and threats, that grew stronger the longer you looked at them. We sat in that bar until closing time, trying to figure out what to do. We could quit, but someone else would just take our place, someone who did not know what waited on the 82nd floor. We could report it, but to whom, and what would we say? That the building was haunted by the ghosts of mad men who had burned to death over a century ago, that they were somehow pushing through from wherever they were trapped, trying to claim new victims. We would be laughed at, fired, possibly committed ourselves. In the end, we decided to go back, to find some way to document what was happening. Tommy knew a guy who dealt in specialized equipment, cameras that could record in spectrums beyond normal vision, audio equipment that could pick up subsonic frequencies. It was expensive, but we pooled our resources, determined to get proof. We told ourselves we were doing it to protect future workers, but I think we both knew the truth. We needed to understand, needed to know why those faces had chosen to show themselves to us. The next Wednesday, we arrived at the Meridian Tower armed with our new equipment. The security guard gave us strange looks but said nothing. Used to the eccentricities of the various maintenance crews, we set up our cameras on the platform, positioning them to record both the windows and ourselves. The audio recorders we placed at various points, their red lights blinking like eyes in the pre-dawn darkness. The descent to the 82nd floor felt different this time. The air was thick, almost viscous, and there was a smell like copper and burning hair. Our equipment began malfunctioning before we even reached the floor, the cameras flickering, the audio recorders emitting high-pitched whines, but we persevered, adjusting settings, swapping batteries, determined to capture something, anything. The faces were waiting for us, more than ever before. They filled every window of the 82nd floor, pressed so tightly together that individual features blurred into a mass of dark eyes and gaping mouths. The glass bulged outward under their pressure, and I could hear it creaking, threatening to shatter. Tommy was adjusting one of the cameras when they began to speak, all of them at once, their voices combining into a cacophony that made my teeth ache. They told us things, terrible things, about the experiments that had been performed on them, the surgeries that had left them neither alive nor dead, trapped in a space between worlds. They showed us visions, projected directly into our minds, of the fire that had freed their bodies but not their souls, of the century they had spent pressing against the barrier between their prison and our world, growing stronger with each life they claimed. They were hungry, so hungry, and they needed us to understand, needed us to see what had been done to them. The cameras were recording everything, or so we hoped, but Tommy and I could barely focus on the equipment. The visions were overwhelming, a cascade of pain and madness that threatened to drown us. I saw the doctor who had performed the experiments, saw him standing in that same room over a century ago, his hands covered in blood, his face alight with the fervor of discovery. I saw the patients, strapped to tables, their skulls open, their brains exposed as he probed and cut, trying to find the source of madness, trying to cure it by destroying it. Tommy grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and pointed at one of the faces. It was different from the others, more defined, more human. It was watching us with something like recognition, like hope. Tommy whispered a name, Dar. Marcus Blackwood, and the face nodded, its features shifting into something that might once have been a smile. This was the doctor, the one who had started it all, trapped with his victims for eternity, forced to experience the suffering he had caused. The platform began to shake, the metal groaning and bucking like a living thing. The faces were pushing harder now, the glass starting to crack, spider web fractures spreading across the windows. We needed to leave, needed to get away before they broke through completely, but the controls were not responding, the platform frozen in place just like before. Tommy was praying, Words in Vietnamese that I did not understand but recognized as desperate pleas for protection. Then I remembered something Jake had done, something that had made them recoil. I grabbed my squeegee, but this time I did not swing it at them. Instead, I used it to write on the glass, forming letters in the cleaning solution. I wrote their names, the ones they had whispered to us, the identities they had lost in death and madness. As each name appeared, the corresponding face would pause, its expression changing from hunger to something else, something like peace. Tommy understood what I was doing and grabbed his own squeegee. We worked frantically, writing name after name as the faces pressed closer, the glass beginning to give way. Some names we knew from the visions, others we guessed at, and many we simply made up, hoping that the act of naming, of acknowledging them as individuals rather than a mass of suffering, would be enough. It worked, or at least it seemed to. The faces began to withdraw, pulling back from the glass. Their dark eyes were still fixed on us, but the hunger had faded, replaced by a terrible sadness. Dar. Blackwood was the last to go, his face lingering at the window, mouthing words I could not hear but somehow understood. He was sorry for what he had done, for what they had all become, but he could not stop them, could not control the hunger that drove them to seek new victims. The platform lurched back to life, rising rapidly away from the 82nd floor. Tommy and I clung to the rails, our legs too weak to support us. The equipment was still recording, capturing our escape, the evidence we had risked everything to obtain. When we reached the roof, we collapsed, lying on the concrete as the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. We reviewed the footage that night, huddled in Tommy's apartment, afraid to be alone. The cameras had captured everything, the faces, the bulging glass, our frantic writing on the windows. The audio was even more disturbing, picking up voices speaking in languages that predated modern speech, telling stories of pain and experimentation, of minds broken and rebuilt, of the thin barrier between sanity and madness. We had our proof, but we both knew it was too dangerous to share. Who would believe us, and more importantly, who would be foolish enough to investigate further? We worked the Meridian Tower for another month, avoiding the north face whenever possible. When we could not avoid it, we came prepared. Our squeegees always had fresh solution, and we had memorized as many names as we could find in the historical records. The faces still appeared, but they seemed less aggressive, more resigned. They watched us work, their dark eyes following our movements, but they no longer tried to push through the glass. On our last day, the company lost the Meridian contract. The building management cited budget constraints, but I knew better. Too many workers had reported problems, too many unexplained equipment failures, too many people refusing to work the north face. They would find another company, and those workers would encounter the faces without warning, without protection. Part of me felt guilty, but I was also relieved. I had seen enough, understood enough. Tommy took a job with a company in Los Angeles, as far from the Meridian Tower as he could get. I stayed in New York but transferred to residential buildings, low-rises where the greatest danger was angry tenants and aggressive pigeons. Jake had moved back to Ohio, working construction, his days of window washing behind him. We stayed in touch for a while, bound by our shared experience, but eventually the emails stopped. The phone calls faded. It was easier to forget when we were not reminded. But I could not forget, not completely. Every time I passed the Meridian Tower, I looked up at the north face, counting the floors until I reached the 82nd. Sometimes, when the light was right, I thought I could see them, the faces pressed against the glass, waiting. They were patient, had been patient for over a century. They would wait for the next crew, the next victims, the next people to look into those dark eyes for a moment too long. I still have the footage, hidden in a safety deposit box along with the audio recordings and the historical documents Tommy had gathered. Sometimes I think about releasing it, about warning people, but I know how it would be received. Just another crazy window washer, another burnout looking for attention. The truth is too strange, too impossible for most people to accept. They need their world to make sense, to follow rules they understand. But those of us who work in the vertical world, who exist in the space between earth and sky, we know better. We know that there are things lurking in the high places, things that watch and wait and hunger. The Meridian Tower is not unique. Every city has its haunted high-rises, its cursed floors, its windows that show more than they should. We clean them all, we silent guardians who see what others cannot, who bear witness to the impossible. The 82nd floor of the Meridian Tower is still there, still waiting, I read in the paper that they are planning to convert the building to luxury condos, attracting young professionals with promises of stunning views and modern amenities. They will live and work on that floor, never knowing what shares the space with them, what watches them through the glass, until one night, when the conditions are right, when someone is alone and vulnerable, the faces will return, and another name will be added to the list of those who jumped, who could not bear what they saw, who chose the pavement over the patience of the dark-eyed dead. My name is Marcus Chen, and I wash windows for a living. It is honest work, necessary work, but it is also terrible work, because we see things that should not be seen, know things that should not be known. The next time you see a window washer outside your office, suspended on a platform high above the street, remember that we are not just cleaning glass, we are bearing witness to the impossible, holding the line between your world and theirs, and pray that we are strong enough to keep the darkness on the other side of the glass, where it belongs. But sometimes, on cold October mornings when the wind howls through the city canyons, I wonder if we are fighting a losing battle. The faces are growing stronger, more numerous, spreading to other floors, other buildings. The barrier between worlds is thinning, weakened by disbelief and ignorance. One day, the glass will not hold, and they will push through, bringing with them a century of madness and hunger, and on that day, those of us who have seen them, who know their names and their stories, will not be surprised. We have been waiting for it, dreading it, knowing it was inevitable. Until then, we clean, we rise with the sun and strap ourselves to platforms that sway in the wind. We spray solution on glass and wipe it clean, removing the dirt and grime that accumulates on the vertical surfaces of the modern world. We are invisible, forgotten, ignored, but we see everything, know everything, and sometimes, like on the 82nd floor of the Meridian Tower, everything sees us in return. The city sleeps below, unaware of what lurks in its highest places, unaware of the watchers at the windows, the faces in the glass, but we know, Tommy and Jake and I, and all the others who have encountered the impossible in our vertical world, we know, and we remember, and we warn those who will listen, though few ever do. The faces are waiting, patient as death, hungry as madness, pressing against the glass that separates their world from ours, and one day, that glass will break. I hope I am retired by then, safe on the ground, my days of dancing with the sky behind me, but sometimes, in my dreams, I am back on that platform 82 floors above the street, writing names on windows as faces press through glass, trying to hold back the darkness with nothing but soap and squeegee, and in those dreams, the glass always breaks, the faces always win, and I fall, joining the 7 who went before, my eyes gone. My name added to the list of those who saw too much, knew too much, could not live with the knowledge of what waits in the high places. My name is Marcus Chen, I wash windows for a living, and I have seen the face on the 82nd floor.